My name is Emma Thompson, and I am 31 years old. 3 days before my wedding, I was supposed to be tasting champagne and finalizing flower arrangements. I should have been floating on air, lost in the giddy anticipation of forever with the man I loved, David Sterling. Instead, the air in the opulent, intimidating living room of the Sterling estate was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. My rich future mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, stood before me, her designer suit impeccable, her silver hair coiled into a severe, elegant bun. Her eyes, usually cold, now held a glint of triumph, a predatory satisfaction that sent a shiver down my spine. With a dramatic flourish, she shoved a stack of legal documents into my face. Her smirk, thin and cruel, said it all. "Sign it," she demanded, her voice like ice, each syllable a chip off of an iceberg designed to sink me. Or the wedding is off. The Sterling family, an assembly of perfectly coiffed, perfectly dressed wolves, were gathered around her like a pack, their gazes fixed on me. David, my fiancé, stood a few feet behind his mother, his face a mask of discomfort, but he said nothing, did nothing. He just watched, a silent participant in my humiliation. They waited, all of them, for the poor girl, the unassuming Emma Thompson, to break. They expected tears, pleas, perhaps a desperate attempt to reason with the unyielding matriarch. They had no idea. They had no idea I had $15 million sitting quietly in an investment account, a secret I had guarded fiercely for years. And they definitely did not know I had a lawyer on speed dial who was about to wipe those smug grins clean off their faces. To understand the full weight of that moment, you need to understand the journey that led me there. David and I had met 4 years prior at a charity gala I was attending with an old college friend. He was charming, witty, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone of his background. I, on the other hand, had cultivated an image of quiet competence. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, a profession that allowed me flexibility and a comfortable, if not extravagant, income. What David and his family didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I had inherited a substantial sum of money, a little over $15 million, when I was 22. It wasn't from a wealthy family legacy. It was from a distant, eccentric great-aunt I barely knew, who had made a fortune in early tech investments and, with no heirs of her own, left it all to me, her only living relative. The inheritance came with a strict condition. It was to be managed by a trust until I was 30, and a specific clause about not disclosing it prematurely unless absolutely necessary. My lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a mind like a steel trap, had been instrumental in helping me navigate the complexities of this sudden wealth. She had also advised me to keep it quiet. "People change, Emma," she'd warned me with a knowing look, "especially when money is involved. You want to know who genuinely cares for you, not your bank account." I took her words to heart. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had. So I lived modestly, invested wisely, and kept my financial affairs a closely guarded secret. It wasn't about deception. It was about self-preservation and a desire for genuine connection. David and I fell in love quickly. He was everything I thought I wanted, handsome, attentive, and from a family that seemed to embody stability and success. But as our relationship deepened, so did my observations of the Sterling family dynamic. Eleanor, David's mother, was the undisputed queen of their empire. She ran everything with an iron fist, from their vast business holdings to David's personal life. Her wealth wasn't just a fact, it was a weapon, wielded with casual cruelty against anyone she perceived as beneath her. And to Eleanor, almost everyone was beneath her, especially me, the nice girl from a modest background who had somehow managed to capture her son's attention. From the moment David introduced me to Eleanor, I became a project. She scrutinized my clothes, my career choices, my family history, always with a thinly veiled disdain. Her compliments were backhanded, her advice condescending. "Emma, dear, that dress is functional," she'd say. Or, "A graphic designer? How quaint. Perhaps you could intern at Sterling Corp., learn something substantial." David, bless his heart, would try to intervene, usually with a weak "Mother, please," but he never truly stood up to her. He seemed trapped in her orbit, a satellite perpetually pulled by her gravitational force. I often wondered if his charm was simply a well-rehearsed performance designed to deflect his mother's criticisms, a coping mechanism for a lifetime of living under her formidable shadow. As the wedding planning began, Eleanor's meddling intensified. She dictated the guest list, the venue, the catering, even the color scheme, all under the guise of helping. Every suggestion I made was subtly, or not so subtly, dismissed. It was her wedding, not ours. I tried to be understanding, telling myself it was just a mother's desire for her son's perfect day. But deep down, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I started to see David's inability to challenge her not as respect, but as a fundamental weakness. He chose peace over principle, his mother's approval over my feelings. Still, I loved him, or at least the idea of him. I rationalized his behavior, convinced myself that once we were married, away from the immediate influence of his mother, things would change. I clung to that hope with the desperation of a drowning woman. Which brings us back to that fateful afternoon, 3 days before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The Sterling Estates living room, a cavernous space filled with antique furniture and priceless art, felt less like a home and more like a courtroom. The champagne tasting was a thinly veiled excuse. Eleanor had insisted David and I come over, claiming she had a surprise. The surprise, it turned out, was for me. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive lilies and Eleanor's signature Chanel No. 5, a suffocating combination. David sat on a plush velvet armchair, looking pale and uncomfortable. The rest of the Sterling clan, David's sister, Clara, her husband, and a few distant cousins, were arranged around the room, their expressions a mix of curiosity and smug superiority. Eleanor cleared her throat, a theatrical sound that commanded attention. "Emma, dear," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "David and I have been discussing some practicalities. With the wedding so close, it's only prudent to ensure all loose ends are tied up." She gestured to the stack of papers. "These are prenuptial agreements, a mere formality, of course, given your modest circumstances." The words hit me like a physical blow. Modest circumstances. She couldn't even bring herself to say poor. I picked up the top document, my hands trembling slightly, though I willed them to be steady. The first page was titled, in bold, stark letters, "Prenuptial Agreement between David Alexander Sterling and Emma Rose Thompson." I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the legalese. It wasn't just a standard prenup. It was a declaration of war. The clauses were outrageous, designed not to protect assets, but to strip me bare. Any property I brought into the marriage would immediately become marital property, but in the event of divorce, I would receive nothing from David's considerable wealth. Furthermore, there was a clause stating that any income I earned during the marriage would be considered David's, and in the event of divorce, I would be entitled to a paltry sum of $50,000, regardless of the length of the marriage. There was even a clause about lifestyle maintenance, requiring me to adhere to certain social standards and travel with David with all expenses controlled by him. It was indentured servitude disguised as a marriage contract. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of betrayal and humiliation. The room, with its antique tapestries and crystal chandeliers, seemed to spin. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced myself to maintain a poker face. I knew this was a test, a final attempt by Eleanor to assert her dominance and ensure I was nothing more than a docile accessory to her son. The smugness on her face, the barely concealed delight in the eyes of the other Sterlings confirmed it. They saw me as an easy mark, a small fish in their vast, shark-infested ocean. David finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Emma, it's just for protection. Mother thinks it's important." His eyes pleaded with me, but I saw the weakness, the cowardice. He was sacrificing me on the altar of his mother's approval. I looked at the documents again, the absurdity of it all washing over me. They wanted me to sign away my autonomy, my future, for a chance to be part of their world, a world that was clearly rotten at its core. A cold, hard resolve began to form within me, pushing aside the initial shock and hurt. They wanted to play a game? Fine. I knew how to play. I closed the folder, a soft thud echoing in the silent room. I met Eleanor's gaze, my expression carefully neutral. "This is a lot to take in, Eleanor," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll need some time to review these with my own counsel." Eleanor's smirk faltered slightly. She clearly expected me to sign on the spot, or at least crumble into a tearful plea. "Your own counsel?" she scoffed. "Darling, what counsel? You're a graphic designer. This is standard procedure for families like ours. There's nothing to review." Her tone was dismissive, condescending, as if I had dared to question a divine decree. "Unless, of course," she added, her eyes narrowing, "you have something to hide." The implication hung heavy in the air, that I was somehow trying to pull a fast one, that my modest background was a facade for something nefarious. I stood my ground. "It's simply due diligence, Eleanor," I replied, keeping my voice even, though inside a storm was brewing. "I wouldn't want to cause any complications later. I'll get back to you by tomorrow afternoon." I saw the annoyance flash in her eyes, but she couldn't openly refuse me the right to consult a lawyer, not without looking utterly unreasonable. She waved a dismissive hand. "Very well, but don't take too long, dear. The wedding is in 3 days, after all." The thinly veiled threat was clear: comply or be cast aside. I nodded, gathered the documents, and without another word, walked out of that suffocating room, leaving David and his family to their self-satisfied silence. As soon as I was in my car, the composure I had so carefully maintained shattered. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and angry, blurring the opulent gates of the Sterling estate as I drove away. The betrayal stung more than I could have imagined. Not just Eleanor's cruelty, but David's spinelessness. He had allowed his mother to humiliate me, to propose a contract that treated me as little more than a gold-digging opportunist, and he hadn't lifted a finger to defend me. The love I thought I had for him felt like ash in my mouth. It wasn't just about the prenup anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and the fundamental question of whether he truly saw me as an equal partner. I drove straight to my small, cozy apartment, the contrast between it and the Sterling mansion stark. I threw the documents onto my coffee table, the thick stack a testament to their arrogance. My first instinct was to call Sarah, my lawyer. I needed her, not just for legal advice, but for moral support. I dialed her number, my fingers trembling. "Sarah," I choked out, they gave me a prenup. It's horrible." Sarah, ever the calm in my storm, listened patiently as I recounted the entire humiliating ordeal, my voice cracking with emotion. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end. Then, her voice, steady and reassuring, came through the phone. "Emma," she said, "this is exactly why we had that contingency plan. This is why you kept your wealth private. It's time to play their game, but by your rules." We spent the next few hours on a video call, Sarah poring over the predatory clauses while I paced my living room, the anger slowly solidifying into a cold, calculated resolve. They want to protect their assets, Sarah said, a glint in her eye. Fine, we'll show them what real asset protection looks like. We'll draft a counter prenup, Emma, one that makes theirs look like a kindergarten drawing. She outlined a strategy that was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. We would not just refuse their terms, we would turn the tables completely. We would expose their greed, their assumptions, and their contempt for me, using my own hidden wealth as the ultimate weapon. Sarah proposed a counteroffer that would make their heads spin. My prenup, for David, would be far more stringent. It would demand a significant financial contribution from his assets to my existing trust, a massive payout in the event of divorce, and strict clauses ensuring my complete financial independence and control over my wealth. The kicker? It would subtly but unequivocally reveal the existence of my $15 million fortune, not in a boastful way, but as a matter of fact, a legal necessity to protect my own substantial estate. It would be delivered not by me, but by Sarah, ensuring a professional, no-nonsense approach. But what about David? I asked, a pang of lingering sadness in my chest. He'll be furious. He'll feel betrayed.
Sarah's voice was firm. Emma, he allowed his mother to put you in this position. He stood by and watched you being humiliated. His fury is his own to bear. This isn't about betraying him. It's about protecting yourself from a family that clearly sees you as nothing more than a potential liability. If he truly loved you, he would have defended you, not let his mother dictate your worth. Her words resonated deeply. She was right. The man I thought I loved had failed the ultimate test of loyalty. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely determination. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was professional but understated. I had a phone call with Sarah to finalize the counterproposal. She had worked through the night, a testament to her dedication, and the new documents were ready. They were a masterpiece of legal jujitsu, using their own tactics against them. The plan was to have Sarah email the revised prenup directly to Eleanor's lawyer, with a copy to David, giving them a deadline of a few hours to respond before I made my final decision about the wedding. The hours that followed were agonizing. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept replaying the scene in Eleanor's living room, the smug faces, David's averted gaze. I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Fear of the unknown, of burning bridges, but exhilaration at the thought of finally taking control, of showing them the true Emma Thompson. Around noon, my phone rang. It was David. Emma, what have you done? My mother just received some ridiculous documents from your lawyer. $15 million? Is this some kind of sick joke? His voice was a blend of shock, anger, and utter disbelief. The carefully constructed facade of the Sterling family was crumbling, and he was caught in the debris. It's not a joke, David, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. It's the truth. I have assets, just like your family does, and like your family, I have a right to protect them. Your mother's prenup was an insult, a blatant attempt to exploit what she perceived as my vulnerability. My counterproposal is merely an equitable response. Equitable? Emma, you never told me you had this kind of money. Why would you keep something like that from me? His tone was accusatory, as if my secrecy was a greater sin than his family's attempted theft. Because, David, I explained, a bitter laugh escaping my lips, I wanted to know if you loved me, or if you loved the idea of someone who could be easily controlled and molded to fit your mother's expectations. And frankly, your reaction to your mother's predatory prenup and your subsequent outrage at my own wealth tells me everything I need to know. You stood by and watched them try to strip me bare, and now you're angry that I'm not the poor girl you all assumed I was. You're not upset about my deception, you're upset about the loss of control. He sputtered, trying to find words, but I cut him off.
This isn't about money, David. It's about respect. It's about trust. It's about the fact that you allowed your mother to treat me like a pawn in her game, and you never once stood up for me. That's not the man I want to marry. That's not the partner I deserve. Before he could respond, I heard Eleanor's shrill voice in the background, a cacophony of outrage. David, what is this nonsense? 15 million? That little? She's a fraud, a gold digger in reverse. Her voice was laced with a venomous fury, the sound of her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. I could almost picture her face, contorted in disbelief and rage, her perfect coiffure slightly askew. "Tell your mother, David," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound strength, "that the wedding is off, and tell her that I hope she enjoys the taste of her own medicine." I hung up before he could say another word, a sense of profound liberation washing over me. Less than an hour later, Sarah called. "Emma," she said, her voice barely containing her amusement, "Eleanor Sterling's lawyer just called me. Apparently, Mrs. Sterling is incandescent with rage. She's accusing you of fraud, misrepresentation, and a host of other absurdities. But she's also demanding to know how you managed to acquire such a fortune. They're completely blindsided." "And the wedding?" I asked, a smile finally breaking through my composure. "Officially off," Sarah confirmed. "They're claiming breach of contract, but frankly, their original prenup was so egregious they don't have a leg to stand on. And the threat of you exposing their attempt to defraud you, given your actual net worth, is enough to shut them up." The relief that flooded me was immense, a cleansing wave that washed away months of suppressed anxiety and hurt. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-worth. I had stood up for myself. I had refused to be a victim. And in doing so, I had exposed the true colors of David and his entire family. The fallout was, predictably, dramatic. Eleanor tried to spread rumors, painting me as a manipulative schemer. But Sarah, being the brilliant strategist she was, had preemptively leaked a carefully worded statement to a few key social circles, subtly hinting at the Sterling family's predatory prenup demands and my refusal to be exploited. The narrative quickly shifted. Instead of me being the gold digger, Eleanor was seen as the greedy matriarch who tried to take advantage of a seemingly unassuming woman, only to be spectacularly outmaneuvered. The humiliation for the Sterlings was immense, a public relations nightmare they struggled to contain. David, for his part, tried to contact me multiple times, alternating between apologies and angry accusations. He even showed up at my apartment once, begging me to reconsider, claiming he truly loved me. But the spell was broken. I saw him clearly now, a man who prioritized his mother's approval and his family's wealth over genuine love and respect. I simply told him, through the closed door, that he had made his choice when he stood by and watched his mother try to destroy me. He chose his family's greed over my heart. Life after the almost wedding was remarkably peaceful. I took a much-needed vacation, traveling to places I had always dreamed of visiting. I continued my freelance work, but now with a renewed sense of freedom and purpose. I also started a small foundation, quietly funding art programs in underprivileged communities, using a portion of my wealth to make a real difference. Sarah remained a close friend and trusted advisor, and we often shared a knowing smile when news of the Sterling family's latest social gaffe or business setback reached us. I learned a profound lesson that day. Money, while not the most important thing, can be a powerful shield, and sometimes a devastating weapon. But more importantly, I learned the value of self-worth, of standing up for oneself, and of recognizing true character. The Sterlings had tried to define me by their terms, to reduce me to a mere transaction. They had no idea that the poor girl they sought to exploit was, in fact, the architect of their ultimate downfall. And as for Eleanor Sterling, I often wondered if she ever truly understood the irony of it all. Her greed, her arrogance, and her absolute conviction that she could control everyone and everything ultimately led to her greatest humiliation. It was a sweet, satisfying revenge, one that tasted far better than any champagne they could have offered.